A terrifying faceless monster suddenly crawled out from the shore. The woman, however, showed no sign of fear. She looked at the time just right. Then she raised her crossbow, aiming at a target she couldn't even see. As the monster got closer, she pulled the trigger and hit the creature right between the eyes. The monster collapsed inside the circle she had drawn beforehand. Her name was Miss Peregrine. She was a peculiar being, a time-resetting bird. Miss Peregrine founded an orphanage to protect the children from evil forces. Every orphan here had a special ability. Look closely at the girl named Claire. Normal people ate with their mouths, but she held a chicken drumstick behind her head. In just 3 seconds, she finished the entire drumstick, leaving no trace. Miss Peregrine gently wiped the crumbs from Claire's lips. If there wasn't enough food on the table, it wasn't a problem. Fiona had the ability to enlarge any object infinitely. She focused on a carrot, and in the blink of an eye, a giant carrot broke through the soil. Then the youngest Bronwyn used her strength, and the enormous carrot was pulled from the ground with ease. Quickly delivered to the kitchen. Need hot water? No need for fire. Olive placed her hands on the kettle, and within seconds, a pot of boiling water sat on the table. There was also Hugh, who could spit out bees, and Emma, whose body was lighter than air. But the most mysterious were the twins Joel and Peter. Their ability was just like Medusa in Greek mythology. They could turn living creatures into stone just by looking at them. Though every child here had a peculiarity, they could only hide inside the time loop that Miss Peregrine created. This meant that all the children were trapped in September 3rd, 1943, forever frozen in time, never aging, until one day a boy from 2016, Jake, appeared. That day Jake received an urgent phone call from his grandfather Abe. Abe warned him that their house had been attacked by a monster. By the time Jake arrived, Abe was lying on the ground, barely alive. Jake was horrified to see that his grandfather's eyes were gone. With his final breath, Abe told Jake to go to the island he had always talked about, to return to September 3rd, 1943, and to find Miss Peregrine at the orphanage. She would give Jake all the answers he needed. With that, Abe passed away. To uncover the truth, Jake took his grandfather's old photos and traveled to the mysterious island. In a hidden forest, he found a rundown orphanage. The eerie place was in complete ruins, covered in dust, untouched for years. Jake wandered around, wondering why his grandfather had sent him here. Just as he was about to leave, a shadowy figure appeared in front of him. Startled, Jake turned and ran. As he reached the staircase, 2 girls were peeking at him from behind a door. In the corner, 2 masked children stood still. Jack panicked and ran as fast as he could, but tripped over a rock and fell. When Jake woke up, a group of peculiar children was staring at him. Surprisingly, he wasn't afraid, he was amazed. They were the very same friends his grandfather had always talked about. The children led him through a cave, until they reached a beautiful house. Jake was stunned. It was the same orphanage he had seen before, but now it was perfectly intact. The door opened. Standing there was Miss Peregrine herself. What Jake didn't realize was, he had already traveled back to September 3rd, 1943. The cave was the entrance to Miss Peregrine's time loop. Miss Peregrine immediately recognized him. Jake looked exactly like his grandfather when he was young. Under her guidance, Jake finally met all of the peculiar children in the orphanage. He realized that everything his grandfather had told him was real. That night, Miss Peregrine gathered everyone outside. A clock was placed on the table. Everyone wore gas masks, standing silently. Miss Peregrine checked the time just right. Suddenly, warplanes roared across the sky. As the last plane flew over, its hatch opened. A bomb dropped straight down, but Miss Peregrine remained calm. She pressed pause. Time froze. The bomb and raindrops hung in midair, motionless. Then she began rewinding her watch. Everything that had happened started moving backward. Time reversed, until they returned 24 hours earlier. Miss Peregrine had used her peculiarity to keep the orphanage safe in a never-ending time loop, locked forever on September 3rd, 1943. The next day, Jake asked Miss Peregrine about his grandfather's death. He mentioned seeing a terrifying faceless monster at the scene. Miss Peregrine's expression suddenly changed. She refused to answer and walked away. Her reaction made Jake suspicious. He felt that she was hiding something. Determined, Jake sought out Emma, the girl who could control air. Emma took him out to the open sea. Then, without hesitation, she dove straight into the water. Jake hesitated but followed. As they sank deeper and deeper, Jake started struggling for breath. Suddenly, Emma released a huge air bubble from her mouth, encasing Jake's head. He could finally breathe. Soon they reached a sunken ship. Inside, skeletons lay scattered across the floor, but Emma moved through the wreck as if she knew it well. She led Jake into a secret room inside the ship. Emma took a deep breath and gently blew out a stream of air. Instantly, the entire sunken ship filled with countless bubbles. As more and more bubbles appeared, the massive weight of the seawater was forced out. Emma quickly shut the hatch, sealing the water outside. Then she took out a small box. It was something Abe, Jack's grandfather, had given her for safekeeping over 70 years ago. Inside, there was a map marking the location of time portals, and several photos of men with all white eyes. The last photo showed a man named Baron. He was the leader of the Whites. They were once hologhasts. They ate the eyes of peculiar children to transform into whites. Abe had been one of the peculiars, but in the end he was still brutally killed by a hologhast. Emma told Jack that he was also one of the peculiars. Only peculiars could enter the time loop and be here. Seeing Jack's disbelief, Emma led him to the orphanage's wall and helped him climb up. From a distance, Miss Peregrine was walking toward the shore with her crossbow. Moments later, a hologhast crawled out from the water. Jack froze. The monster looked exactly like the one he had seen when his grandfather was killed. Miss Peregrine calmly pulled the trigger. The arrow struck the hologhast right in the forehead. The creature collapsed inside the white circle that had been drawn beforehand. Emma turned to Jack and explained, "Hologhasts are invisible, no one else could see them," but Jack had inherited his grandfather's peculiarity. Now he was the only person who could see hologhasts. Miss Peregrine had been able to kill the hologhast because Abe, when he killed his first hologhast, had memorized the exact time and place it would appear. By remembering this information, Miss Peregrine was able to hit an enemy she couldn't even see. After realizing Jack had discovered his purpose, Miss Peregrine finally told him everything. Years ago, a group of former peculiars led by Baron attempted an experiment to achieve immortality. They captured a time-resetting bird and locked it in a cage. Then they forced peculiars to wear masks connected to the bird. But something went horribly wrong. Smoke started rising from their bodies. Their muscles twitched violently, and then their bodies mutated. Their faces became monstrous. Their mouths grew sharp fangs, and in an instant, all of them transformed into faceless, invisible hologhasts. Later, these hologhasts discovered that the only way to return to human form was by eating the eyes of other peculiars. Using their invisibility, they hunted and slaughtered countless peculiars. To protect the peculiar children, Miss Peregrine created the time loop on this hidden island. Just then, Olive rushed in with an urgent message. Someone had arrived. It was Miss Avocet, who could also transform into a bird. Her time loop had been discovered by hologhasts, and all the peculiars under her care had been wiped out. Miss Peregrine realized the island was no longer safe. She immediately decided to lead everyone away. Emma begged Jack to come with them, but Jack couldn't just abandon his parents. He stepped through the time portal and returned to the present day. But soon after, a gruesome murder took place on the island. An elderly man had been killed, his eyes were missing. Jack's heart pounded with fear. He knew that a hologhast had followed him to the island. Without hesitation, he rushed back through the time portal to warn Miss Peregrine. But before he could enter, a strange man began chasing him. To Jack's horror, it was Baron, the leader of the Whites. He had been searching for the entrance to the time loop. Baron had taken Jack hostage and brought him to the orphanage. By now, Baron no longer needed to eat eyes to stay human, but he had never given up on achieving true immortality by harnessing the power of time birds. Miss Peregrine knew that the hologhasts would soon attack the orphanage. Jack was the only one who could see them and lead the others in battle, so she offered herself in exchange for Jack. She transformed into her bird form and flew into Baron's cage. As the hologhasts closed in, Jack rallied the peculiar children, arming them for the fight of their lives. But before the battle even began, a hologhast suddenly appeared and grabbed Miss Avocet. Before anyone could react, the hologhast devoured her eyes, killing her instantly. Enoch was suddenly grabbed by the hologhast's long tongue and lifted into the air. Just as the hologhast was about to devour his eyes, Jack shot an arrow, hitting the hologhast. The creature roared in pain and released Enoch. Taking the chance, everyone rushed out of the room, but the enraged hologhast became furious and chased after them relentlessly. Fiona stood outside the window and made the tree branches grow rapidly. Before the hologhast could break in, everyone climbed onto the branches and escaped toward the ground. At that moment, several fighter jets appeared in the sky. Without Miss Peregrine's time loop, the orphanage was about to be reduced to ruins. Suddenly, the hologhast smashed through the window and lunged at them. At the same time, the last warplane dropped its bomb. In a split second, Emma grabbed Jack and jumped off the building. The hologhast and the orphanage were blown to pieces. Meanwhile, Miss Peregrine's time loop was destroyed. This meant that the peculiar children would start aging rapidly and eventually die. Their only hope was to rescue Miss Peregrine and rebuild the time loop, but Miss Peregrine had already been taken to the other side of the world by Baron. To save her, they had to cross the ocean as quickly as possible. Emma led everyone to the sunken ship. Using her power, she filled the ship's hull with air. As more and more air was pumped in, the ship slowly floated to the surface. Finally, all the seawater inside was drained out. Then Olive ignited the ship's engine, and just like that, they solved the problem of crossing the sea. Jack used the map his grandfather had left behind to locate the nearest time loop. Following the map, they soon arrived at their destination. Inside an abandoned amusement park, Jack and Emma spotted Baron and several hologhasts. Emma immediately provoked Baron to lure the hologhasts out. As expected, the creatures chased after her. The peculiar children, already in position, started throwing snowballs at the hologhasts, waiting for them to slowly become visible. Emma then blew colorful gel onto their bodies. At that moment, a horde of skeleton soldiers appeared. It was Enoch. He had revived the sunken ship's crew. A fierce battle broke out. The hologhasts were strong, but they couldn't withstand the overwhelming numbers of skeleton soldiers. One by one, they were eliminated. The last hologhast tried to escape, but Bronwyn impaled it with a carousel horse, sending it crashing into the sea. With the hologhasts defeated, only Baron and his two henchmen remained. Hugh opened his mouth and unleashed unleashed a swarm of bees, launching the first attack, but Baron's men were powerful too. One of them transformed back into her true form and leaped onto the platform. Before she could react, Claire suddenly used the mouth on the back of her head to bite down on her. The twins immediately removed their masks, revealing their deadly gaze. In an instant, the enemy turned into a lifeless stone statue and shattered upon hitting the ground. Fiona threw a handful of beans at the other henchman. Within seconds, the beans grew into massive vines, wrapping him up tightly. On the other side, Emma created a powerful gust of wind, pinning Baron against the wall. Jack rushed into the lab and freed the caged time birds, but soon Emma's strength faded, and Baron broke free.
And the man had just left for work, but something fell from the sky. He walked over and saw that it was a fluorescent light from the studio. At first, he was just curious about where the fluorescent light came from in the empty sky, but he didn't know that he was deceived by everyone around him. For 30 years, the man's name is Truman. Since birth, he has lived in the Taoyuan island prepared for him by the director. The entire island is a giant studio isolated from the world. Except for him, all the people on the island are actors. Even his parents and wife are carefully selected professional actors. There are more than 5,000 cameras on the island, more than 200 countries, live broadcast. His every move is witnessed by more than 1.7 billion people, but only he is kept in the dark. In Truman's view, he is just an ordinary office worker living a monotonous life every day. When he goes out in the morning, he always meets a black couple. "Oh, and in case I don't see you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night," will throw themselves on him enthusiastically. On the way to work, he always met a pair of twin salesmen who pushed him in front of a billboard to sell him insurance that he never bought. Although life was a bit monotonous, Truman was very happy every day. Until this day, he met a familiar figure on the road. He walked closer and saw that it was his father who had died many years ago. Before they could recognize each other, two people rushed out from the roadside and took his father away. Truman wanted to chase them. For a while, the pedestrians and cars on the road seemed to be deliberately blocking him. Helplessly, he could only watch his father being taken away while the people around him turned a blind eye. At night, Truman came to the beach alone, recalling the unbearable past of his childhood. It turned out that when Truman was a child, he took his father out to sea for fun. The sudden storm took away his father, and his father's death also left Truman with a shadow on the sea, so that even on the business trip arranged by the company, he dared not take a step. And all of this was carefully arranged by the director. The purpose was to dispel Truman's idea of leaving Taoyuan Island. In the memory, it suddenly rained heavily, and Truman got up and wanted to leave, but he found that the only place where it was raining was his head. The next morning, Truman told his mother about meeting his father. But his mother was unusually calm. She thought all this was just her son's illusion. "You're just feeling bad because of what happened to you. Sailing off into that store. But I've ever blamed to Truman." Truman came to the basement, opened the box that had been sealed for many years, found the old photos of his father. He was more convinced that the homeless man he saw that day was his father. Then yet he found a red sweater. It was a gift from his first love, Roland. It turned out that in college, Truman fell in love with a girl at first sight. And the girl also looked at him affectionately. When the two looked at each other, he was interrupted by his current wife. At this moment, he didn't know that. The director had already arranged a partner for him. At a dance, Truman met Roland again. When the two looked at each other, he was forcibly taken away. Since then, Truman thought he would never see Roland again, but fate made them meet again. In order to avoid any regrets, Truman summoned up the courage to approach Roland, but Roland looked around nervously. Then he pulled Truman away from the camera and ran all the way to the beach. He couldn't bear to see Truman kept in the dark for his whole life. So he told him that everything here was fake, and he had to escape from here quickly. Just as the two were talking, a man who claimed to be Roland's father suddenly appeared and forcibly took Roland away. He said that his daughter suffered from mental illness and asked Truman not to believe him. Peel. Don't worry, we're going to. We're moving to. Truman never saw Roland again, but he used his memory to piece together Roland's appearance with torn posters. In front of the TV, Roland watched this scene with tears in his eyes. On the way to work the next day, Truman accidentally heard his every move being broadcast on the radio, square something frequencies. Truman realized that someone was watching him, so he began to observe everything around him and found that they were all doing repetitive actions, and even someone was following him. He suddenly changed his schedule and broke into a building and found that there was a lounge behind the elevator. Truman told his friend Marlin about his discovery. He didn't know that his best friend since childhood was actually an actor carefully selected by the director. In order to comfort Truman's family, he accompanied him to look through the past albums, but accidentally made him find that they were the same as the wedding photos. His wife's gesture of folding fingers meant that his wedding vows were all lies. So Truman found his wife and wanted to confront him face to face, but his wife hurriedly said that she had to rush for an operation. Seeing his wife's panicked behavior, Truman became more convinced of his guess. "Cross my fingers for you." After seeing his wife go to work, Truman hurriedly rode his bicycle to follow her, but as soon as he arrived at the hospital, he was stopped by a strange doctor. "Looking for?" "My wife, Nurse Burbank. It's very important." "I'm afraid that's not possible. She's in pre-op, okay? Fine. Can you pass a on game?" "I'll try. Can you tell her I had to go to Fiji and then I'll call her when I get there." When you get to Fiji?" "You got it." "Fine. I will. I'll tell." After successfully deceiving the other party, Truman rushed back. However, the next second, the patients and staff in the hospital began to block Truman tacitly. After finally getting rid of everyone, he finally came to the operating room where his wife was. Seeing these doctors who only knew how to perform, Truman was stunned. It turned out that even his wife's identity as a doctor was fake. After returning home, Truman became silent. He saw through the whole scam, but he couldn't expose the lie at all. What made him even more unacceptable was that his wife was advertising at this time. His wife, who had seen through it, could no longer pretend. He picked up a knife to protect himself, and in a hurry, Truman could only subdue him. Just when Truman wanted to get to the bottom of it, his friend Marlin found him with beer. Then the two came to the old place and listened to what happened to Truman recently. Marlin pretended to be concerned and said that no matter what happened, he would stand by Truman and would believe him without reservation. At this time, Truman had no idea that every word of his friend was written by the director, and in order to make the plot more ups and downs, the director even arranged it. The 1494 I found him for you, Truman. So I came by tonight, Sure, he's got quite a story to tell. Truman, who knew nothing about it, slowly walked towards his father, naively thinking that this was arranged by God. At the same time, the director arranged close-ups while gradually increasing the accompaniment of music. The touching reunion scene brought tears to the eyes of the audience in front of the TV. For a time, the ratings of this reality show hit a new high. However, when everyone thought that Truman's life was back on track, he suddenly disappeared from the camera. The director found something unusual and asked his assistant to call, but no one answered. He then called up the video of last night and found clues. To be cautious, the director arranged for Malone to visit, but found a doll under the quilt. At first, they thought Truman was just hiding. But Malone searched the house but couldn't find it, until he opened the cabinet. A hole appeared out of thin air, leading directly to the grass in the yard. Truman actually escaped. The director angrily shut down the program that had been live for 30 years, which caused a great uproar. The program group's phone was flooded with calls. In desperation, the director used the moon as a searchlight to organize all the actors to conduct a carpet search, but found nothing. In desperation, the director forced the sun to rise. Tao Yuan Island entered daytime early. After a long search, they finally found Truman on the boat. Everyone was puzzled. How did Truman, who was afraid of water since childhood, overcome his fear? There was no time to think about it. The director resumed the live broadcast. All the audience excitedly watched in front of the TV. They even started to bet whether Truman could escape. The camera switched to the boat. Truman took out the pieced-together picture of Roland from his pocket. That was the source of his power to sail to the sea and the unknown. Roland, in front of the TV, cried with joy after seeing this scene. The director arranged for someone